Good afternoon and welcome to The Appeal Live, a co-production of Now This and The Appeal. I'm Alana Sivan. Late last year, the mayor of Seattle, Mayor Jenny Durkan, announced that she is not seeking re-election, which clears the way for new leadership in Seattle, which is a city that has once again found itself at the center of raging debates surrounding policing, criminal justice, housing, and economic inequity. Now, Durkan is a former federal prosecutor who became Seattle's first lesbian mayor, and she appears to leave behind a mixed record on many of those critical issues. So, for example, Mayor Durkan came under fire last year when police responded to protests following the killing of George Floyd by routinely tear gassing and pepper spraying peaceful protesters. In response to this police reaction to protests, community advocates called for changes to policing in Seattle. They called for major cuts to the police budget. They also called for a complete reimagining of public safety in Seattle. In response, Durkan repeatedly rebuffed those demands. Durkan also vowed to address problems of homelessness when she came into office in 2017. But homelessness has continued at crisis levels throughout her mayorship, driven by rising property values and a severe shortage of affordable housing. And in fact, Seattle and King County recently ranked third among major urban areas when it comes to the overall homeless populations. And this is a position it has held for the past 7 years. So with Durkan now departing, the race to take her seat is heating up. 6 candidates have already joined the campaign, and a handful more are expected to throw their hats into the ring in the coming weeks. Seattle holds its mayoral primary on August 3rd, with the top 2 candidates advancing to the general election in November. So over the next few weeks, we will be interviewing every candidate who will come on and interview with us on The Appeal Live. So if you are in Seattle and running for mayor there, please give us a call or email. So we are going to continue our coverage today with a conversation with Randall, who is the Director of Economic Development and Interim Executive Director of Seed Seattle, which is a nonprofit community development organization. He has worked for lawmakers in Georgia and Maryland and has been a supporter of local business in Seattle since moving to the Emerald City in 2007 to serve as business service manager for the Office of Economic Development. So, Mr. Randall, thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you have touted yourself as a transformational leader for a transforming city. So transformational is a pretty bold promise for anyone, but particularly somebody who's entering an executive position and who will be really tasked with bringing the city out of a devastating global pandemic. So talk to us about your vision for transformation in Seattle and how you think it differs from other candidates in this race and how you plan to execute that plan, especially since you haven't been in an elected office previously.
Well, thank you for the question and for the opportunity to be here. So what I mean by a transformational leader, we're going through some challenging times. Some of the issues that we're dealing with have to deal with the COVID pandemic, also the social unrest because of what happened to Brother George Floyd. And also the economy is really struggling right now. So we're transforming into something after coming out of something we've never experienced before, which is these 3 issues. So as we move toward the new normal, whatever that may look like, we must prepare ourselves to transform and be able to adapt. In order to do that, we're going to have to change the way we do things in the city. And we're also going to have to change the way that we respond to certain situations and some of the things that we say in regards to our business community and what have you. So while I've never held office before, I'm not new to politics. I have a long history of politics with my grandfather, my father, and my sister. And I've worked on every level of government, from the federal government to the state government and local government, including being on the mayoral staff in Georgia, and then working alongside 3 other mayors there. And then, of course, I've worked under 3 mayors here in Seattle. So the advantage that I have is I've been on the ground working all over Seattle, taking care of businesses large and small, recruiting businesses to the city and keeping businesses in the city, And I've also been working in the neighborhoods and various issues that are facing our youth and seniors, what have you. So the advantage that I have is I have a clear understanding of what's going on around the city. I have a clear understanding of the inner workings because I'm the only candidate who has actually worked for a city department for over 8 years with the city. So that gives me a unique perspective as far as seeing firsthand some of the things that we need to address. And I've been addressing those issues for the past several years I've been here. So we have a lot of work to do, some challenges to overcome, but we also have to prepare to move forward. And I think I have the unique combination of skill, background, leadership, and of course a track record to show that I can get things done.
So you mentioned this a little bit, and I talked a little bit at the top as well, that one of the key issues in this city is policing. And we know that specifically in Seattle, the city's police department has been under federal court oversight due to litigation brought by the DOJ against the department for police misconduct. And so during this last year, particularly with responses to protests, Seattle police faced scrutiny for this response. And then shortly thereafter, Chief Carmen Best suddenly announced her retirement, which left Deputy Chief Adrian Diaz as interim chief. So talk to us about how you, if elected mayor, would address not only the ongoing consent decree, but also police misconduct in general.
Well, as an African American man from the Deep South, I've been harassed by officers as a youth and also as an adult. It's a very demeaning feeling. It's painful and it's hurtful, and you wonder why did this happen. So I can relate very well to what's going on, and I understand I'm just as tired of everyone else. However, I believe we have to approach this in such a way that we're going to make changes that are going to be sustainable and that will stick. My concern about the call to defund the police, although I understand exactly what it means with the reallocation portion as well, but I had to ask myself a question. If we reduce the funding of the police department and you have a group of people who are last hired will be the first fired because some police officers must lose their job because of the cuts. Then you have on the other spectrum, some police officers who are close to retirement and they may get an early out. But if you have some police officers on the force, especially those who harass or commit atrocities against citizens that are still on the force in spite of the funding, I asked myself a question, am I truly safe because we cut the funding, but that officer or a group of officers who commit those atrocities are still on the force? And if they're still there, the funding hasn't accomplished the main thing that we want to accomplish, is to stop the killing of African American men and women. So I said, does the funding really work or not? And in this case, what we're seeing around the country, there's still atrocities being committed by certain police officers against people. So my strategy is to be more proactive in doing what I call progressive discipline. And what progressive discipline means is that we will log every incident of every police officer that they commit that they should not have committed. And we will keep that file and we will track officers to the point where when we feel though that they may be a problem if they continue to have the opportunity to be on the streets, that something could happen. What I'm talking about through progressive discipline, tracking everything that they do. And when it comes to the point where we are concerned that if they go on the streets, we have to remove them before giving them that opportunity to be out in the streets to commit atrocities. Right now, we're reacting after something happens. We have to be more proactive to flag these officers down within the force, document what they're doing, and make the move before they do something that they shouldn't do in the public. But as far as the funding, I want to try to rebuild the police department to be more diverse and representative of our communities. In order to do that, I have to be able to pay new officers that we're going to be trying to recruit from our communities. So we need to have access to that money. But I also understand that there's opportunity for reallocation, which means that there are some things that officers are not prepared to do, and there's some experts outside that can help the officers do a better job. And I would like the opportunity to reallocate funding within the department to bring that subject matter expertise, whether it's mental health, de-escalation, drug treatment. We need to bring that expertise within the department and create a community policing program starting within the department where they are accompanied by experts on certain calls so they can be the lead people in trying to resolve these issues. Also, providing additional training where officers will learn how to at least stabilize a situation, especially in the mental health crisis, where they can avoid using lethal force until someone gets there to help them deal with the matter. We have to be very strategic as we do this, because as a mayor, my main responsibility is to make sure that all the residents of the city of Seattle are safe. And I have to do that by using the public safety delivery system, which consists of 4 agencies: the fire department, police department, um, ambulance drivers, and also human human resources providers, or our human resource department. That is the public safety service delivery system. It has to be strong, well-funded, well-staffed in order to make sure that we are providing the protection and service to all the citizens in Seattle. If any of those departments are not operating appropriately, then the entire system is in jeopardy. And I think that is what we're experiencing now. So as we deal with this issue, to find these officers and get them off the force, keep them off the force, we must do a better job in tracking them to prevent them from doing atrocities. And we also have to rebuild our department through by providing opportunities for people in the communities, mainly our youth. I want to launch what I call a Youth Public Safety Academy to expose our young people to opportunities as a first responder, with the hopes that they will go in to the police department and other areas for public safety and be our new generation of service providers going forward. So that is my strategy to try to deal with this. It's very pinpointed, but we have a lot of things that we can do, but we have to do it strategically, and it has to make sense.
So you will have to forgive me because I'm going to push back just a little bit here, but that's what makes these shows so fun. So you talk a little bit about how instead of defunding, or, people call it different things around the country, divesting, reallocating, et cetera, that you want to focus on sort of targeted figuring out which officers should be disciplined, which ones shouldn't, et cetera. And first of all, I don't think those two things necessarily, are in conflict with each other. But the issue is different, because when we talk about defunding, I think it's a recognition of, the fact that there are so many things that police just not only aren't suited to do, as you've already said, but also that when they respond to, they actually make worse. Like we've even seen for different responses to mental health issues, even if you have the best officer responding to the scene, sometimes just the presence of a police uniform, sirens, can be triggering for someone who's in the middle of a mental health crisis. At least that's sort of a perspective seen here on the Appeal Live. So I'm curious to hear from you, given all of that, if, you also mentioned that all of the other infrastructures need to work, right? So like our emergency response system needs to work, our public infrastructures need to work. And given that police funding usually takes up a good portion of a city's whole budget, do you potentially see sort of making that sort of distribution of budget a little bit more even amongst the different departments? And if you potentially see divesting any amount from police departments in order to allow for that equitable distribution among other services, like, human services, things of that sort?
Well, I think, all the funding for all of our departments comes from the general budget. So the way that you balance it out is how you allocate money from the general budget to different departments. And you have to make sure that you know exactly what the department needs and you meet those needs. So when I'm talking about making sure every department that makes up that system is staffed and funded, is making sure that per capita, we have 783,000 people. We need to make sure that we have enough personnel to cover enough ground, whether it's firemen, police department, ambulance drivers, human service providers. We need to make sure that we have enough personnel in place to be able to provide the services for the people per capita around the city. So the allocations will always be adjusted. As more people come to the city, quite naturally, you have to put more resources in all of the city departments, to be honest, to make sure that we meet the needs of the city. But when going back to your statement about officers going out, when I talked about progressive discipline, that means that we're able to not only flag officers to keep them from going out on certain calls, but this is also a way to remove them from the force. In other words, I don't want to wait until they get out there and do something crazy. I want to start tagging, tracking, and finding these officers and getting them off the force before they get an opportunity to even go out and commit an atrocity that we have to respond to.
So I guess I'm curious to see, do you think there's ever a situation where maybe there don't need to be officers at all responding to these sorts of calls? Like perhaps we can have an emergency first responder. We've seen that a lot of cities
Yeah.
are starting to do that. Go ahead.
Yes, I think there are opportunities. I think my vision is a police officer, he could be in plain clothes or she could be in plain clothes, going out on a call, but just to be there just in case. They may not even have to do anything. They may just show up, stand across the street, stay in the car. But you need to make sure that every situation is secured or you're prepared just in case something happens. So if they accommodate a mental health expert to a scene where someone is having a mental breakdown, like I said earlier, the expert is the one that is leading the call. The officer is secondary in that regard as backup in case something happens. I mean, I visualize a visit where you have a plainclothes officer and a mental health expert and they're together, but there's no uniform or anything like that. And the officer is not saying anything, but he or she is just there just in case something happens. If it's a decent visit and nothing happens, then fine. But if it does seem to escalate, then you have an officer that is prepared to protect the mental health provider and then also try to stabilize the situation until we get some help for the person that may be going through an episode. But I want us to try to figure out how to have more of a partnership, more teams actually working together to go into these situations, as opposed to just putting officers out there who just trained to shoot or what have you. We have to create different scenarios for them and provide them support that they need to go out.
So I do want to point to one program, for example, in Eugene, Oregon, and just sort of I'll just throw this stat out there and leave it, where they found that 97% of calls there didn't even need a police officer. So just throwing that in there for you, and then I'll move on.
Yeah, I get that, and there will be many cases. And to me, there's nothing wrong with the officer showing up just to observe and not actually having to do anything, and it appears to be okay. Then they go on their way. But if you recall, some months ago, we had a mental health expert go out by herself, and as a result, she got killed. There was no one there to help her just in case. So I'm not saying that the officer has to do anything if he goes on these calls with these people who have the expertise. I'm just saying that at that particular situation, the officer basically stands down and let the experts do their job and just be prepared if something happens. Hopefully nothing happens. And when we get to the point where they don't have to show up, then that's great. But I think we have to sort of phase it in to make sure that we make it work right. And I think that, yes, there are opportunities to do that.
Understood. So, okay. So let's move on and talk a little bit. I might come back to policing in a little bit, but I want to move on to something else. Let's talk about housing and unaffordability.
Right.
So we've seen how it's really been out of control for years, housing instability.
Mhm.
And this problem is only going to get worse when we reach the so-called evictions cliff,
Right.
which is the date when eviction protections expire and landlords start to move to kick out tenants who have fallen behind during the pandemic. And so in response to this, lawmakers at both the state and the city level across the country have offered some level of protection by providing a right to counsel in eviction proceedings. So, and we know that there is recent legislation on this to protect tenants. Is this something that you think goes far enough? And what other steps would you take to help keep tenants who may be struggling to pay rent in their homes?
Well, this is a situation that I think could have been handled a little bit differently. I think that rather than basically saying to people that you don't have to pay your rent, we should have suggested that they have a conversation with the landlord and they decide what they can afford to pay, if anything, before the city stepped in. For example, it could have been a situation where a landlord is charging someone $2,000 a month for rent, but the tenant probably would have been able to say that, I can't afford the full 2,000 right now. Is it okay if I pay half? The landlord probably could have accepted that or something like that. We still would have some money coming in. But to make the landlord whole, the city probably should have stepped up to try to give some type of tax incentive or tax credit to the landlord to make up the difference, whatever arrangement that they worked out with the with the tenant. If we had gone that way, then at the end of the day, when everything is back to normal, then everyone would have been made whole with the city providing the supplement to the landlord as the landlord is providing a lower lease rate to the tenant. So something like that could have happened, but it didn't. So now we're in a situation where a lot of people haven't paid their rent. Landlords are struggling to pay their bills if they still have mortgages. So now we got a situation that we're really dealing with. I still think that there's an opportunity for the city to help keep people in their apartments, at the same time provide some assistance to the landlords who basically just had to eat the cost over a period of time. And I think that we can do that with some type of incentives or tax breaks against the property tax, so that everyone can be made whole and people can stay in their homes. I'm not sure how it's going to work when you, because when people go to court, when you're talking about they haven't paid their rent, what have you, it's going to be quite interesting to see what some of the rulings are going to be, even though the city has voted to provide the tenants with attorneys or access to attorneys at no charge. It's kind of odd looking. You know, you're a landlord, you're paying taxes, and now the city's basically saying we're going to take some of your taxes and use those taxes to defend tenants against you. It's just something weird to me to see something like that. But in response, I think that the city has to come up with a more creative way to balance it. And I would think that work more with the landlords and the tenant and have conversations where they can strike out a deal where it makes sense, so that everyone can stay in place and also bills can be paid.
So something that we've seen with the sort of homelessness in Seattle is that despite it being this big crisis there, and Mayor Durkan championing the creation of a lot of things to address it, that homelessness has still sort of remained at crisis levels. And over the course of Mayor Durkan's term, she faced a good amount of criticism for, you know, not lowering those levels, but also for her sweeps of encampments and pursuing sort of other enforcement-minded measures, like adding 100 additional police officers to remove people who are unhoused from sidewalks. So you have talked about how you want to address homelessness in a, I think you say, compassionate but firm way. So I have a few questions, which are one, talk to us about what you mean by compassionate but firm, and also particularly when it comes to these homeless sweeps. Is that something that you would do as mayor? And if not, how do you plan to address the homelessness crisis?
Yeah, great question. I don't believe in the sweeps. And the reason why is, what good is to sweep the people from where they're just trying to lay their heads down and just stabilize their lives? You don't have anywhere for them to go. I think what has erred is that we have not provided stopgap situations for people as we're trying to transition them into housing. And I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to actually go out and visit my brothers and sisters who were experiencing homelessness. I went by the courthouse, King County, to talk to some people. I went to one of the tiny villages, tiny home villages, Nicholsville, and I also went to the only sanctioned tent encampment that we have up in the University District. And in talking to these individuals and seeing what I saw, I believe that we can do a much better job with the money that we have. This is what I'm talking about being compassionate, is that we have to make sure that we do everything possible to make people comfortable as we're transitioning or trying to transition them into permanent housing or to address their situations. We've fallen short in trying to find places for them to be comfortable. And what I want to propose is what I call the Dignity Project, and it's based off a model down in Hillsborough, Florida, or Tampa, Florida, Hillsborough County, where during the pandemic, they found 100 people on the street that they needed to shelter in place, but they could not find any shelter for them. So what they did, they created a tent community. But the difference in this tent community, they had better quality tents that they purchased themselves. They filled the tents with everything that they needed, from the beds, blankets, everything. And then they put around them food tents where they have 3 meals a day, They brought in the service providers to provide the services, and then they had trucks for toilets, showers, and for laundry. And going around to these different communities I've seen, I don't see any of that. Nicholsville has a truck, but it's broken. There are porta potties at the tent city, and there's nothing to be offered for the people by the tent communities. To me, that's inhumane. To me, that's not fair that we shift that we want to go and sweep people, and we don't have a decent place for them to go while we're trying to transition them. So the Dignity Project will make available more sites, and I know there's people who push back on that, but we all have to own this situation as we try to help the people who are on the streets in the tents and the RVs. We have to create a place where they can be off the streets, have access to what they need, including the services, amenities, counselors, and what have you, as we transition them into permanent housing, or if we have to transition into certain institutes like for the mental health, and our veterans also need assistance. But I think we have plenty of money. We just have to do a better job of using it to serve the people. I did not see that, and I was really appalled and hurt when I visited and saw with my own eyes that the minimal things are being done, but we're spending a lot of money with contractors to get this work done. We need to hold them accountable. We need to give them directions of what we expect, and we need to make sure that the people are getting what they need. That's the compassionate side. The firm side is that we have local laws on the books that everyone has to adhere to. And I'm afraid that the local government, as we speak now, the current government has set up a situation where a lot of our brothers and sisters who are going through this homelessness situation feel as though they don't have to adhere to any of the ordinances and laws on the books. So we have to create a situation where we put them in a place where they're comfortable. They don't have to be on the street. They don't have to want for anything. But at the same time, tell them that we're going to make sure we take care of you and transition you. But we do need you to understand we have laws that we want you to abide by, and we have rules in the shelters that you need to adhere to as well. If you don't, we have to have consequences, because there are a lot of people who have done things around the city, not necessarily homeless people, but just people in general who have got this attitude that it's okay to do things and not be prosecuted. I'm talking about assault, property crimes, graffiti. That's unacceptable. We have to make changes to make sure that everyone is adhering to the laws. And I mean everyone. It doesn't matter what your situation is. Everyone needs to adhere to the laws.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today on the Appeal Live, and thanks for putting up with all my questions.
Well, I've enjoyed it, and I hope that I provide you some information to talk a little bit more about my candidacy and what I'm all about. It's time to do something different. We can't continue on this path, and we also have to take a look at our future, the new norm, what's going to be, and how we're going to get there. And I have a plan and a strategy to get us there.
Thanks again. And for all of our viewers, stay tuned, because in 2 minutes, we're going to be having another segment talking about the right to counsel. So we'll see you all soon. Thanks so much.